video game journalists are some of the most miserable people on the internet. They are writing articles about video games, about this space that millions of people would love to get paid to talk about, and yet they're just sitting here and complaining constantly. And just a few days ago, we found out that Brown Dust 2 would not be censoring costumes, they would not be altering mini games, and now these journos are furious. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, this could have been a rare instance where they defended gamers and said, yeah, censorship is bad, so I'm glad that the game isn't being altered, even if I don't play it or don't like it, but that's not what they're doing. They're sitting here saying that Brown Dust 2 fans got so irate over gooning censorship, in quotes, the developers have walked it back. So they are saying it wasn't censorship, you guys are just gooners, and it is ridiculous that the developers gave you what you wanted, which is insane. Even if there are games that I personally do not play or that I do not like, I would never sit here and say, I want them to be censored. And I'm glad that fans are having an experience ripped away from them. That is just an insane take to have. But it's the one Joel here has, who, by the way, is a freelance writer who bounces between several different websites. So he's just somebody who is irrelevant in this industry, and none of these sites want to keep around because he's not actually talented at what he does. But it says Brown Dust 2 has landed itself in the maddening circle of rakes as its announcement that it'll be complying with requests of censorship over the weekend. Of course, this drew player ire, and in an emergency stream, they walked it back. The news comes as Brown Dust 2 had been blocked from releasing on Steam, and storefronts have begun to crack down on games with sexual content. Are they going to really get into the nitty-gritty of why this is the case? No. They simply say there are player concerns that particular countries, namely the UK, have begun to cause issues with the game over the Online Safety Act, but he doesn't get into the discussion about how video games have been censored for over a decade now to comply with certain regulatory boards, to comply with the demands of payment processors. None of that conversation, which is extremely important context, because this Journo wants you to believe that the developers were like making this decision themselves because they suddenly were uncomfortable with the content, which is wild. They say one character, Raphithia, appears underage. Not that she is underage, because she's not. They are saying that because this character could be interpreted as underage, that's why it's okay that the developers were going to censor it. Characters Rue and Seer were also listed, with decisions to quote-unquote censor them stemming from age-inappropriate styling and abusive situation framing, respectively. And another character had been aged up by swapping the school uniform concept for an older looking office fit, and on top of that, it announced that the minigame Slap Slap Pop would be changed or removed due to depictions that would be interpreted as abusive. The minigame involves the player slapping the butt of a character in time with a rhythm game. Now, if you don't know what Brown Dust 2 is, it's got a lot of fan service. It is very appealing to, as they are calling it, the Gooners, but this is the entire identity of the game. So to change a handful of things might not seem like a lot to somebody who doesn't know what the game is, but it is a lot to the players, and that's why they face so much backlash. But the journos are not going to sit here and say that, yes, censorship is bad and censorship is unfair, and they're going to blame you for this being the situation the developers find themselves in because the developers walked it back. They do point out, though, that in the wake of a weekend of complaints, NeoWiz has walked back on most of this in the stream. The developer explained that it would now be moving to a per-region basis for the game, and they say that it is filled with content that isn't age-appropriate, and there are a lot of clashes on the culture side. The game is clearly not intended for kids, and still a good portion of this feels like a quick 180 to ensure that the most vocal side of the player base doesn't abandon the game entirely, which makes sense because companies ultimately need to keep their customers happy. and need to make money, but they say it is also still really strange that players are irate over what does look like a child bride. So they are saying you have a pedo brain. I guess if you like the character designs in this game, which by the way, they're fictional characters and they're not supposed to be children, and you are really freaking weird for just viewing these characters as like child brides. But of course, they want to say you are disgusting degenerate if you happen to play a game like this. This isn't shocking. Weeks ago, when we heard that the game was going to not be released on Steam, Kotaku had put out this article saying the Gooner Gacha game abandoned the Steam launch after refusing to make changes. So they were basically saying it is the developers' fault that they abandoned the players, but then they were saying that it's good that this is happening because the content in this game isn't appropriate and they do not agree with the sexualization that happens in this game. There's also this article by Guru Gamer that says Brown Dust 2 censorship caused massive drama. Developers schedule live apology. It's not that they caused a massive drama, it is that they were censoring an entire game and players were upset with that. Is it drama to call out censorship? I personally do not think so. I think that it is players standing up for their entertainment, defending creative freedom, and these journalists just don't seem to get that. When we had found out that they were reversing course, I did another video on it. It will be linked down below, but I think that it is a little bit of a tough situation because on one hand, I really appreciate the fact that they are not censoring anything, that they are going to try to hold their ground as much as possible, and they are not going to cave into the demands of these certain regions and regulatory boards. But on the other hand, it is tough to trust them because they initially had sort of jumped the gun. They shot first and asked questions later. They didn't gauge what reaction would be to the idea of a couple of outfits being censored. And if they could just suddenly turn around and say they're not censoring it, why did they jump at the idea of censoring it in the first place? I get that they're a company, they need to make money, and ultimately they need to sell their game in as many places as possible, but I just think that they should have handled it very differently up front, and it is a little bit hard to trust them. I 100% get why people are saying we need to be cautiously optimistic and still keep a close eye on what they're doing in the future, but it is also especially hard for them when they're just trying to make their players happy, and then journalists are saying, oh, you're a pedo for liking character designs in a video game, and you're a disgusting, degenerate person, and they even try to write it off as if it's not censorship because they're saying, oh, fans got so irate over Goon and quote-unquote censorship, like it's just the developers who caved in to the demands of terrible people. So yeah, unfortunately, they are fighting a battle on all sides right now. I will be keeping a close eye on this because I do think that they deserve praise for not censoring it off the bat. I do think that they handled it pretty freaking poorly, though. Either way, the video game journalists, the activists in this space are now furious that there is not more censorship and that sex appeal is not being toned down and that they did not get their way. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this important and informative, make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.